Hello and welcome back to Analysis, where we've been discussing the flow of British citizens volunteering to fight in the Syrian civil war. Rejoining me from the first half of the show is Kerry Bullivant, media officer at Cage, and now joining me here in London is Abdulaziz Al-Mashi, who's head of media for the association known as the UK Syrian Community. And on Skype, we have Dr. Alan George, who's Senior Visiting Research Fellow at London University's King's College, and the author of Syria, Neither Bread Nor Freedom. Welcome to the programme. Let me begin with you, Abdulaziz. I mean, is it legitimate for British people to go to Syria to fight in the civil war?
Well, what's going on in Syria doesn't concern only the Syrian people. What's going on in Syria is concern every human being. And I think these people have a right to go and help, and that because they have a moral obligation to go and help the people who are suffering in Syria. If you look at the situation in Syria, the people of Syria have been abandoned by the international community. I mean, the powerful countries in the West and in the region have abandoned the Syrian people. And you look at Assad regime, he went far away of using his security forces and military to crush the peaceful protesters. So these people, I think, they didn't accept what's going on in Syria, and they thought it is important for them to go and to provide some kind of assistance.
Well, let me now turn to you, Dr. George. I mean, during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, a lot of people from this country went out and helped the Republican side, mainly in their fight, in that civil war. I mean, do you agree with Abdulaziz Al-Mashi that it is legitimate for people from this country to go and help in the fight there?
Well, legitimate, it of course, has a particular meaning. Lawyers complain with the meaning of that. I agree with Abdulaziz. The world abandoned the Syrian people. The outside world actually is in no position to judge whether it's legitimate or not, having done absolutely nothing to resolve the problem, absolutely nothing to protect civilians being gunned down in the streets. It's a good point, in my view.
So, in other words, let's not quibble then about
whether it's legitimate or not, in a strict sense, is a matter for lawyers.
All right, let's leave the word legitimate out of it. So you're saying it's morally right and even commendable for people to go and do that, is it?
Yes.
Well, then what do you think of the government policy of arresting people when they come back and questioning them and even charging some of them?
Well, the government is somewhat obsessed with the notion of terrorism, whatever that might mean. They have their policies, which are well known. I'm unsurprised.
So obviously I take it from that you don't really agree with these policies.
I think they're misplaced to a great extent. I think the threat of terrorism, the definition of terrorism, is pretty loose and pretty dangerously loose.
Well, Kerry, I mean, you agree with that? I mean,
I do entirely. I think that when you look at the situation out in Syria, you have Assad, who a brutal dictator, using barrel bombs, the full power of a military to crush what was a peaceful protest, what was an unarmed civilian population. And it was at that point that the arms started flowing and that people started going there to defend them. It's well known and well documented that Assad is backed not just by Iran but by Russia as well, two very sort of powerful players in the region, and yet the rebels have no support from anyone. So surely the moral feeling that people from all different colours and creeds are gonna feel to support them is something that should be commended.
Well, isn't that a bit of an exaggeration to say the rebels have no support from anyone? We know that Qatar, Saudi Arabia have been pumping money for guns or even guns in there. We know that CIA and special forces are training rebel fighters in Jordan, in the north of Jordan, to cross the border into Syria. So it's not correct to say the rebels have been totally abandoned.
We from Iran, we have the Republican Guard in Syria on the ground fighting. Actually,
yeah, but that's not my point. I'm not talking about who's helping Assad. I'm saying who's helping the rebels. There are foreign governments who are helping them.
The foreign governments are helping certain segments that they feel will push their national interests. The help has been very, very limited. I'm sure my other guests will be in a much better position to explain all the details. I'd like to point you in the direction of a Dutch interview recently with NOS Television, where they spoke to a former Dutch soldier who was out there fighting with the rebels, and they asked him, look, why are you here? And what was his response? He said, if our governments had came and supported innocent people who were being massacred, then I wouldn't need to be here fighting on their behalf. But the Western world has abandoned
well, the Western world maybe, but not every country. But Abdul Aziz, let me come back to you. I mean, should people who are going out from here be careful about which groups they support, or is it fine for them to help any particular group that they find in Syria that's fighting the Assad government?
Yes, absolutely, because in Syria now we have so many groups, and there are many groups who pretend they are fighting for the revolution, for the opposition, but in fact they are agenda for Assad himself. So they have to be careful. For us, I will tell you something. In Syria, we don't need the fighters, actually, at all. I mean, the Syrian people are more than enough to bring Assad down. What we need the international community to take their responsibility. I mean, okay, people are coming and everyone comes to help us. We can't just say, no, you're not welcome. I mean, those people showed solidarity with us. They came to help us. We can't say to them, no, go back at all. This is not of our characteristics. But you've been talking about the Americans and other countries regionally, like the Qataris, the Saudis, who help the opposition. In fact, they did. They used to help the opposition. Now they don't help the opposition. And they help only certain groups. And they recruit these groups to fight the Islamists before Assad. And the main problem for the whole conflict in Syria is Assad. If we get rid of Assad, the Syrian people will never tolerate any extremist views or whatsoever. I mean, what the international community should do, they cannot stop people of going and fight in Syria.
So what should they do?
I think they must keep in touch with them. I mean, if you treat those fighters in such a way by stripping them their citizenship or criminalize them, they will be more dangerous on Britain or even on the Syrian people.
Well, let me ask Dr. George about that whole issue of this blowback and so on. What is your view? Do you think there is a risk that some people who are fighting, particularly those who are fighting alongside Islamist groups, will come back and take action against the British government or British people?
Undoubtedly, there's a risk. I think it's a minority, very small minority. But I think, going back to what I said earlier about whether or not it's commendable for people to come and help in Syria, to help Syrian people, obviously there's up to 1,000 different groups active within Syria. Now, I come to this as a wishy-washy liberal. So I have a particular view of which groups are acceptable. Others, Islamists of various shades, will have a different view from me. I certainly would be concerned that there are certain, the most extreme of the groups must surely be a training area for individuals who may come back and use violence with the UK. It's a risk.
But how can the government deal with that? I mean, do they have to stop people at the airport and ask them which group have you been helping? I mean,
they feel they have to. I mean, it's pretty well established that there is a global tide of Islamism, and a certain percentage of the individuals caught up in that movement are very dangerous in terms of the Western lifestyle or in terms of security in Western countries. I guess the authorities have to do what they feel they have to do. But, as I said earlier, I think they perhaps go about it in a rather non-focused way.
But if the government is sort of arresting people and some people and not others, doesn't it sort of make a lot of Muslims feel that, we're in a special category, and we just don't know where we are when we come back into this country.
Well, it's certainly perceived as a provocation, and I think it can actually fuel extremist Islam, the very thing the authorities don't want.
Well, Abdullah Aziz, let me come back to you to the flow of weapons and fighters going in. Is it the case that Turkey has toughened up now on people crossing their border as a result of recent events?
Yes, recently, I mean, there are more restriction on people to go into Syria, according to people who live on the border with Syria. But still, I mean, Syria is an easy country to access. People if they can't get access through Turkey, they can do it through Lebanon, through Jordan, through Iraq. I mean, Syria and border with 5 countries, plus the Mediterranean.
So it's almost impossible to stop the flow. So
Absolutely not. You can't stop the people to go and fight in Syria. I think the British government, if they really concerned about the security of their own country, they must keep in touch with those people who went to fight with their family, urge them to come back, help them in their rehabilitation. No, I think it is not, you can't tackle this problem with just strip them off of their citizenship or criminalize them. Will make things even worse.
Well, Kerry, what's your view about the strength of the different groups? I mean, the British government is trying to help the moderates with their non-lethal equipment and training and whatnot. But there are these extremist groups that we know are partly linked to Al-Qaeda. I mean, are the moderates now completely outnumbered, or what's going on?
I mean, from our research on the ground, it seems that the more powerful groups are, for example, the Islamic Front, who aren't directly associated with Al-Qaeda, but do have an ideology, you could say, to implement some form of Islamic State. ISIS are on the ground with increasing numbers, and they have a lot of problems because of their very, very harsh nature in certain areas. And then you have other groups, for example, Jabhat and the FSA, who are also about. I think that it's very hard to say sort of which group is at any one given time in charge of the situation. It's become even more fluid since the fact that, as was pointed out before, any aid coming in to the moderates is on the condition that you fight the Islamists now. So you now have sort of a 3-way battle going on with sort of the FSA and the Islamists fighting Assad, and then the Islamists and the FSA fighting each other as well at the behest of backers. Even Jabhat and ISIS are fighting one another as well. So it's very, very complicated.
Abdulaziz, doesn't the fact that there are these very extreme groups in there who have been accused of human rights violations and atrocities and massacres and so on, doesn't that discredit a large part of the opposition?
Yeah, we do agree. We acknowledge the fact we have some extremists in Syria, but we have objective evidence. Some of these groups are linked to Assad. I mean, like ISIS, they are 100% linked to Assad. Even Al-Qaeda denounce them. And look at the FSA. I just to highlight something. My honorable friend said the Islamic Front is linked to Al-Qaeda. Actually, it doesn't. It's not. The Islamic Front, it doesn't look to Al-Qaeda.
No, I said it wasn't linked to Al-Qaeda.
No, the Islamic Front, it doesn't link to Al-Qaeda.
Not linked to Al-Qaeda.
Not at all. And even the American, 2 months ago, they said, okay, we will talk to those people. The question is, if we need to sort out the Syrian problem, the international community must arm the opposition, give them weapon to shut down Assad air jets, so we can stop the barrel bombs. And as everyone knows now in Syria, the opposition are fighting the ISIS, and who are so terrorist group. They are terrorists, and they are fighting Assad.
Well, let me put that point to Dr. Alan George. I don't know whether you've got any particular view or special expertise on this issue of whether or not you can say that the ISIS group, which is the most extreme, is linked somehow to the Assad government.
I think it's very questionable. I'm well aware of the allegations, but hard evidence is in somewhat short supply. What is beyond doubt is, of course, that the opposition is extremely fragmented. Much of the most recent military action has been between rival Islamist groups, and of course the Assad regime has benefited enormously from that. And another dimension, quite apart from the human rights abuses and if you like, terrorism practiced by the more extreme groups, it shouldn't be overlooked that banditry has, I fear, become a large part of opposition activity. Many of the groups that live in Syria in the opposition have their own agendas that are not very much mixed up with toppling the government. One is reminded very much of the Lebanese civil war from 1975 to 90, when the various militias became entrenched in their own economic systems, their own political agendas. I fear much the same evolution has occurred in Syria.
But isn't there one big difference?
Precisely the vacuum that created by the absence of international action against the regime.
But isn't there a big difference in that there wasn't a proxy war in Lebanon? Very few outside countries or fighters were going in to help the Lebanese parties in that civil war, whereas in Syria now it is very much a proxy war, isn't it, as well as a civil war?
Israel was very deeply involved with the Christian militias, for example. The Syrians had their own proxies, Amal and Hezbollah. The Iraqi government, Saddam Hussein, likewise was involved. It really became a proxy war basically between Syria and Israel, but with a hand from many other parties. Syria, of course, has evolved into something similar, with outside parties playing significant roles.
Well, Kerry, is Syria the kind of cockpit of the new war on terror in the way that it's being perceived?
Well, definitely the MI5 seem to, and the security service seem to think that this is how they're going to justify their next round of funding, by playing up the threat that Britain's coming back from Syria pose. The fact of the matter is that there's no evidence of any risk of blowback, and the fact that if you look to the situation, most of the people that are going out there are intent on staying out there. They're not seeing this as some sort of jihadi holiday. Well,
eventually they're going to come back. They're not going to permanently emigrate to Syria.
Well, if you talk to the fighters on the ground, and if you see the interviews that are coming out from the majority of them, they're all saying they have no intention of coming back. As far as they see it, their intentions lie with either seeking, as they see it, martyrdom, or establishing a free state in Syria.
Well, I think on that note, we've run out of time. I'm sorry to not give you another chance, Abdulaziz. And thank you very much indeed, Alan George, for being with us. Thank you, Kerry Bullivant, as well. And thank you, of course, for watching.